Welcome to the webinar. We'll be getting started shortly. Hello everyone. We'll be getting started in roughly 2 minutes. Welcome to the webinar. We'll be getting started in 1 minute. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm glad you could join us here today. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. There's a chat box available where we can park questions for the end of the presentation, and we'll also ensure you have our contact info for more detailed questions that might come up, that might take a conversation or an email thread to answer. This presentation will also be published to our channel after we're concluded, so if you want to rewatch or show this to a colleague later, you're more than welcome to do that. I'll be putting together some other content for our YouTube channel in the coming months as well, covering a variety of subjects, and I'm always open to suggestions for content subjects. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to our YouTube channel. Nexus IT consultants are based out of Park City, Utah, and we specialize in virtual CIO services for businesses both small and large. My name is Tim, and I'll be talking with you today about the mind and processes of hackers and how they utilize a combination of computer code and social engineering to accomplish their goals. A little bit about me before we get started though. I've been using computers for roughly 27 years and currently hold 11 different IT certifications that range from Linux administration to technical training. I've literally grown up alongside computers, watching them and the attacks on them grow and transition over nearly 3 decades. Attacks have never been more sophisticated than they are today, but the good news is that protection is also more sophisticated too. Before we get too far, I want to make sure we're all on the same page with a few key concepts that we'll cover today. First up is the term attack vector. An attack vector is sometimes known as an attack surface as well. This is the point of weakness in your business and therefore the point of entry for a would-be hacker's malicious code. Ransomware is a term applied to a combination of tools used to infiltrate a network and then encrypt data that is essential to the business. A little bit more on that later. Phishing is the act of sending fraudulent emails purporting to be from known sources like Microsoft or FedEx, for example. Spear phishing is a variant of the above, sometimes also known as BEC, or Business Email Compromise. It gets this name because it comes from a supposedly known sender, such as the CEO of the business. Worm is one of the least known yet most dangerous hacker terms. Most sophisticated attacks are going to leverage a worm of some kind to spread throughout your network after patient 0 is infected. This is probably most often seen in the form of email attachments that are opened when they shouldn't be. Now that we've talked a bit about some terms that we'll be seeing in this presentation, let's touch on who the players are in this arena. I think the most important fact to point out before we go down this list is the fact that ransomware payouts crossed the $1 billion per year mark in 2017. That was up from $24 million the year before, over a 4,000% increase in quote-unquote revenue for these guys. This kind of revenue, if we can really call it that, is going to attract all kinds of shady players like moths to a light. There are some that are predicting that ransomware attacks will have an average frequency of one attack every 14 seconds by the end of 2019. It's an illegitimate and illegal gold rush of sorts. This definitely attracts all types. Of course, organized crime is going to want in on the action at those numbers. There are actually organizational charts for the way these guys operate. They have district managers and everything. Nation states are also going to use these statistics to engage in a different kind of politics with each other. A hacktivist is someone who releases intellectual property when they deem the company they're targeting as unethical. We'll talk a little bit about the shadow brokers coming up. They've been very active lately. The lone wolf is someone who sees the dollar signs behind this. They simply want free money. A not so fun fact is that these types can buy ransomware as a service kits off the dark web and plug in their Bitcoin wallet address. Sounds very technical, but basically once they send out the malicious code, the Bitcoin payments from victims come straight to them. And of course, there's the malicious insider, probably the most dangerous group of all considering their access to systems. Luckily, today's most cutting-edge protections and strategies can prevent against them accessing certain systems, as well as prohibiting them from emailing sensitive intellectual properties and financial information. So what are some of the common attack surfaces or vectors that these guys use? We can break that down into 5 major categories. The physical attack vector describes attacks that utilize malicious USB drives, unlocked workstations, or the theft of hard drives. The endpoint attack surface is by far the largest and therefore most common point of attack. We often see malicious code delivered to unknowing recipients by email. The mobile attack vector is gaining popularity as our mobile devices become more and more like computers every year. Luckily, there are some great protections out there for mobile devices, including solutions that employ data loss prevention policies to prevent sensitive company info from leaving the network on a mobile device. As the cloud becomes more a part of our everyday computing, the data being stored there gains value as well. We typically see those attacks on platforms such as Amazon Web Services, known as AWS, or Microsoft's Azure Cloud. IoT stands for Internet of Things, devices with network connectivity that don't typically have a keyboard and mouse. If the default passwords aren't changed on these devices, they become vulnerable to manipulation. So in my travels researching different data points for this presentation, I stumbled across this website whose content is tailored to healthcare IT. We can see 2 examples of attack surfaces in the sidebar. The best protection against physical hard drive theft, as we see noted here, would be something called FDE, or full drive encryption. The cloud hack mentioned here resulted from someone forgetting to change the default encryption password on a cloud storage location. This made it very easy to see the data stored there. A common statistic I hear from my counterparts on this subject is that 98% of all attacks are social engineering. I don't see that supported in the data, though. Some of the most infamous attacks of the last 2 years were completely automated. WannaCry was one of the most famous instances of this and required zero human interaction to spread throughout the world in just hours. Human error is involved in nearly 100% of all initiation, though. So what exactly does that mean? Let's take a look at something called the kill chain. The kill chain is a term used to describe the life cycle of a hacker's takeover of company data. So step 1 in the kill chain is reconnaissance. The hackers are siphoning email addresses. They're trying to figure out if any people of interest within the company will be at any public events in the near future. Maybe they'll leave a device unattended or expose themselves as a target of what we call a man-in-the-middle attack. Once they have enough intel on the target, the hacker will move on to step 2, weaponizing a payload. They'll take the malicious code that they've compiled, and then they'll craft an innocent-looking email and hide their attack code inside an attachment. They might also load a high-value USB drive with a hidden executable, so when an employee comes along and thinks finders keepers, they'll infect the corporate network when they plug that drive in to clean it. Step 3 in the kill chain is delivery. This is where we can make the biggest difference. The most common attack surface for delivery is email, hands down. A well-trained staff that's also tested periodically complements cutting-edge endpoint and perimeter security very well. Step 4 is exploitation. This happens within seconds of that nasty email attachment being launched. If the malicious code manages to exploit the vulnerability in the computer, and it hasn't been detected by current security software or hardware yet, things will likely start to go downhill very quickly at this point. So step 5 is where the malicious code is solidified in the target's computer. It's installed because it wasn't caught by the security software. Step 6 is where that malicious code makes a connection to the hacker's home base, also known as command and control. So at this point, we've reached step 7, which is active data manipulation by the hacker. They're in, and they're either installing keyloggers to advance their access to password-protected systems, or they're encrypting data to set the target up for a ransom demand. At this stage, they'll also be corrupting backup sources and disabling any remaining security hurdles that may exist. So once the hacker is at this stage of the kill chain, it's most likely that the breach will only be discovered when it's far too late. This can come in the form of a ransom demand popping up on a computer. This could also come in the form of an angry customer phone call regarding compromised payment info or possibly even identities. If a single business can forensically be identified as the point of compromise, there's no telling where the financial damage could end depending on the depth and the breach and the nature of the information stolen. At this stage, a compromised company would be subject to something like a PCI or a HIPAA audit, depending on which industry they're in, and depending on what is found in that audit, penalties could vary widely. The penalties for HIPAA noncompliance, for example, are based on the level of negligence and can range from $100 to $50,000 per violation or per compromised record, with a maximum penalty of $1.5 million per year for violations of an identical provision. Basically, all regulatory standards share one thing in common: protect the data at all times, in transit, at rest, and especially on laptops that leave the office building. There's no excuses. Luckily, there are many cutting-edge defenses available for pennies compared to potential violations. As my grandmother used to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But anyway, let's circle back to the largest attack surface, and therefore where we can be the most effective in combating a hacking attempt. And that, of course, is email. Email is the easiest method of delivery in the kill chain. Hackers that attempt entry to the network via email are typically going for a volume-based approach, knowing that their success rate will be low. If a hacker is specifically targeting a company, they'll typically use spear phishing, as we discussed earlier, pretending to be the CEO, for example. Let's take a look at the anatomy of a malicious email. There are several components to look out for when analyzing a potentially suspicious email that's made it through your spam filters. A quick side note actually to that, if you don't have a spam filter, I'd highly recommend looking into Office 365, as it includes spam filtering as well as many other security and productivity tools. We'd be more than happy to chat offline about that in more detail. Our contact info will be at the end of this presentation. But anyhow, back to the anatomy of a malicious email. The first thing we want to see is the true email address of the sender, not just the label applied to it. So in this example, we see the label as system administrator, but that doesn't exactly mean it's coming from our system administrator. In fact, when we look at the actual email address, it's sysadmin@gmail.com. Anyone could come up with that address, and it's definitely not the system administrator of our company. A good rule regarding email attachments, point number 2 on this slide. Basically, if you didn't ask for it, don't open it. Personally, I prefer to retrieve all attachments and communications through my customer portal whenever possible. That way I know the source that's giving me the information because I was the one who logged into their site. Regarding point 3 and 4, one thing that we definitely have going for us is that hackers apparently hate spell check. Apparently they're against it. Poor grammar is a hallmark of all these online scams. Hopefully that remains true for years to come. The next component of a suspicious or malicious email is the most important aspect of being a defensive computer user. Hyperlinks that lead to websites. Just because a link says it goes to company.com doesn't mean it will actually take you there. It's similar to the sender's name compared to their actual email address. One's a label, and the other is the actual addressable internet presence. When you hover over a link, your email client will display the actual website you'd go to if you clicked. www.company.com is not the same as company.scam.com. Lastly, let's be wary of urgent calls to action, such as, if you don't pay, your account will be shut off in 24 hours. The hackers are using high-pressure sales techniques to prevent their targets from thinking about the details. This definitely increases their success rates. So here we can see the anatomy of what we would call a spoofed URL. URL is just a fancy term for a web link. So we can really break this down to 3 major components when talking about being safe regarding links. Always look before you click. If you hover over a link, it will tell you where you're about to go. For example, if I hover over this link ksl.com, we can see it's actually going to bring us to nexusitc.net, which is our homepage. We also want to check for subtle tricks. Scammers will use slightly misspelled variations of well-known sites to trick you into simply skimming the URL and clicking. For example, this link of udot.com is actually going to udot.notreal.com. Those extra letters will bring us to a completely different and potentially malicious website. And then finally we have URL shorteners. These could go anywhere. If we mouse over our third link, we can see that the actual address does match the label here, but there is no telling where this link actually will land us. The good news is there are tools that you can put these shortened links into, and they will tell you the actual website that is the destination. So to recap, Employees represent the biggest risk in cyber attacks, but can also be our company's best resources in the fight against ransomwares and the like when employees are properly trained and occasionally tested. Let's talk a little bit more about the machine side of things, though. A well-trained staff won't matter much if your network perimeter and your workstations aren't fully equipped and protected against the latest threats. A worm-based attack may be initiated via a traditional email delivery, but these more sophisticated attacks traditionally use machine weaknesses rather than human weaknesses to gain a foothold in the target's network. If a hacker finds an open port or a weak remote support application or other vulnerability that can be exploited, such as a security camera with its default password still, they can get their hooks into that very first machine. From there, the worm will carry the malicious code from computer to computer where it can replicate and continue its hacking goal, whatever that may be. The good news is that even newer attacks can be thwarted with centrally managed patching and behavior-based security software that recognizes these malicious behaviors. Let's talk a little bit about WannaCry. WannaCry is a great case study in these worm-based attacks. You may have heard it hit in the spring of 2017 and became a national news story literally overnight. The estimates are that WannaCry caused upwards of billions of dollars worth of damage, according to some sources. It's one of the most important windows into the mind of a hacker, or in this case, hackers. Just a few months ago, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia formally asserted that North Korea was behind this attack. As we can see here, WannaCry is the weaponized payload, or step 2 in the kill chain we looked at earlier. Eternal Blue was the delivery mechanism, also known as a worm, or step 3 in the kill chain. Well-trained employees didn't have a chance to stop this one, but a properly patched system would have. This timeline illustrates why next-gen security software and patch management solutions are a must. This exploit was weaponized and delivered in less than a month after the hacktivist group Shadow Brokers made the information public. Now that we've learned that North Korea was behind the attack, we could infer that their equivalent of the NSA had been working on this for at least a couple of months, but the point remains the same. Definition-based antivirus solutions only had 30 days to try to scramble and get their product updated, whereas next-gen, behavior-based solutions were already prepared to stop this kind of attack dead in its tracks. So let's review some best practices that we've covered. Item 1, hover over addresses in emails and on web pages. Inspect the actual URL. We definitely don't want to end up on a scam site when we could have just typed the actual URL into our web browser when in doubt. Item 2, utilize all physical security measures that are reasonable. For example, when you walk away from your computer, lock it to prevent unauthorized access. Make sure your screensaver has a password on it so that when your computer times out, if you forget to lock it, it requires a password to wake it up. Have policies at your company that do not allow unauthorized personnel to use corporate computers that could touch corporate data. If you have your passwords physically written down, please make sure you lock them up. Item 3, know your source. Go straight to FedEx to retrieve that invoice instead of opening that email attachment or clicking that link. Remember, u.scamsite.com is not the same as u.com. Also, link shorteners could go anywhere. Hover and inspect. Use a third-party tool if needed, to determine where that shortened link goes. And lastly, don't plug in any USB devices that you don't recognize. This, combined with fully patched, up-to-date systems using next-generation security software, can really protect a business against all forms of attack. So what to do if you do suffer an infection or a breach? Step 1 is to immediately stop what you're doing and disconnect any potentially infected or breached devices from all networks. In other words, unplug Ethernet cables and disconnect from Wi-Fi. Step 2, change passwords to any potentially breached accounts. Step 3, call a cybersecurity professional to begin forensic and remediation of the issue. So in other words, bring in a security professional to help you determine where you were attacked, how you were attacked, and therefore where the remediation of the issue lies. Please ensure not to destroy any data, even if it's encrypted, as this may provide essential to the forensic investigation. Step 4, call your cybersecurity attorney. Step 5, call your cybersecurity insurance broker. And lastly, set up a conference call with all of the above parties to determine the best plan of action. This may include the need to inform customers of a data breach depending on what was compromised. How do we prevent it from getting to that point, though? Let's talk a little bit more in depth about how to protect yourself. We recommend penetration testing and threat assessments. Essentially, a preemptive audit that will allow you to determine the vulnerabilities in your network before you become subject to regulatory or legal action. Have a solid, unified threat management system. In other words, rather than patching together a bunch of different security solutions that are available for free online, look at having one unified system that talks to, the different components talk to each other, so that in the end you have succinct reporting and the ability to audit all activity on your network. To that end, you don't want to buy big box store firewalls. You would want to go with a commercial grade firewall that supports things like auditing and logging. As we talked about earlier, spam filtering is essential to cutting down on a lot of the volume-based attacks that can hit a company. Content filtering. Control what websites your employees can access and therefore limit what websites can infect your network. Lock down the use of third-party apps such as Dropbox and other cloud-based file sharing softwares. A stolen or compromised computer out in the wild that has Dropbox constantly logged in would be a very easy point of attack for a hacker to be able to compromise your corporate data. Implement a mobile device policy and security protocols. For example, one item in a mobile device policy would be not to stay logged into a third-party app that could compromise the corporate network. Force passwords that are difficult to hack and force changes at least every 90 days. Lock down user and administrative privileges. What we see far too often is that everyone's everyday computer user is able to install programs. What this also means is that same user is able to accidentally install malware into the network. Backup and image your systems properly. This will protect you against a number of threats in the sense that you have the option to go back in time to a point before the infection took hold. A very important item on this list is employee education. As we've talked about, there are really two categories to protecting yourself against the hackers. One is user behavior, and the other is perimeter and endpoint security on your workstations. A well-educated employee group will be able to spot and stop a lot of these threats as they come in. Have an acceptable use policy. This speaks more to things like the malicious insider, where you would want to hold people accountable for what they are and are not allowed to do on your corporate network. And lastly, lock down the ability for employees to use their own devices on your corporate network. If you aren't protecting the device and know that it can be audited and logged and verified to be clean, you shouldn't allow it on your network. So the bottom line is that we really do need to get serious about protecting companies against these cyber threats. As we talked about earlier, we saw a 4,000% increase in illicit revenues from this, and the attacks therefore will only pick up in frequency. What does it look like to protect your company though? There really are three major steps to getting your security landscape in order. Step one is threat assessment. Have someone come in and do a thorough audit and take a look at your current landscape. What's lacking? Are there any employees bringing their own devices into your company? Are you using third-party apps that don't have good and thorough security and permissions? These are all questions that can be addressed in a thorough audit. Step two, action plan. Based on what's discovered in that audit, you would want to look at the available options for both software and hardware upgrades to solidify your perimeter and endpoint security. Step three is ongoing monitoring and maintenance of the action plan. Security threats are ever changing and ever evolving, and so there must be a proactive approach in ensuring that your protections are evolving with the threats. Taking a set it and forget it approach could leave you vulnerable in a short period of time when attacks advance. As a bonus to anyone viewing this presentation, Nexus is offering a free IT audit and threat assessment. We typically charge $2,500 for these, but we're willing to help you make sense of your current landscape and where improvements can be made. That audit is yours to keep regardless of whether you choose to do business with Nexus. No fine print. For those who already know where they want to make technology improvements, we also offer a full suite of solutions that cover all of the vulnerabilities we discussed today. Constant centralized patching to ensure protection against the newest threats, complemented with next generation, behavior-based security, and off-site backups to protect against theft, fire, and flood. We typically charge $69 per user per month for this package, but for anyone attending today, we're willing to offer an introductory offer for the first 12 months of $40 per user per month. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time to discuss your technical needs. Also, please subscribe to our channel using the subscribe button below so you'll be notified when we release new content. Thank you and have a great day. Okay, so I'd like to open up the chat room to any questions that you may have. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any questions coming into the chat, but please guys, feel free to email us or give us a call anytime if you have any detailed questions, any technical questions you'd like us to answer in regards to your current security landscape. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.